Well, I don't know about you. You're probably sitting at home, aren't you, with a cup of tea, all cosy, aren't you, on the sofa watching this? And I'm freezing cold. Well, it was sills last week, wasn't it? Making them sills or looking at them and how they construct. And then to tie them in to the chassis rails, you need outriggers. So we're going to do some outriggers today. How many Dinos did they make? Do you remember? I said I'd test you. Anyway, it's for you to fill that in, them gaps in, isn't it? And if you didn't and you don't know, watch last week and then you'll know, won't you? Right, so these are the outriggers and there's a pair of them. Obviously handed side to side. Let's say these tie in the outer sills to the chassis rail and then they go via the floor. So sort of elaborating on what I was looking at last week. So these also end up with the jacking point. So this is the end that goes on the sills and we're looking at upside down now. So, and that where it joins the chassis rail. So you'd have your chassis rails there, your sills there, and then we have these sort of jacking point areas here, which is basically these. So that effectively will attach on there and that goes onto the floor. This all hits the floor here and then that goes onto the sill area. Now another little quirky thing, this is one that I've saved off something. Now you can see these old little pot rivet holes, you can see the remains of pot rivets. So I can't remember what was going on here, but it was something where they'd really buggered it up. And then this thing's nothing to do with it. This is something they gobbed on there with a bit of weld. So it's not very nice, but it's a really useful pattern, so I always, keep these things as patterns, as I say. And here's another little quirky thing. So this is a Dino 2.4. Now, I can tell that. I know too much about these, don't I? It's very boring. You wouldn't want to be stuck in the kitchen with me at a party, would you? Right. It's because it stops there. Whereas the 2 litre ones, see, that's a pattern. They go all the way to the end there. So they would actually go all the way up to the end there with their bit. And this area as well is longer. So, is it longer? No, talking about a hat, it's the same length. But basically that ends up with the whole thing at the end there, rather than finishing there. So it's different, it's a different setup. Basically, so that's why I've got a pattern for that one and a pattern for this one. So I think, if I remember rightly, yeah, that sort of ends like that over the hole, like that one. And it just sort of spot welds through. Whereas that one ends like that, over that hole like that. That's how it goes. So we're making these 2.4 ones, but we're not doing them today. We're concentrating on the outriggers. So I'll put these to one side, and I'll put them to one side. And that's what we're doing. So that's my patterns. So we've got patterns. That one's a deconstructed one just to get the idea of the shape, because you have to put a lot of shape into this. And then we have a bit of shape in that one. So I've just been doing that one earlier. And then that's the pattern for that. That's a cardboard pattern, just to double check it. So that bit will be that one there, that part. That bit will be that part. Then that bit will be that part. So that's the pattern for that one. Like that. There we go. So that's what we're working on. So I've marked up, we're making a pair and they're handed. So I've marked up enough metal here to do the lot. So I've marked all this lot out on here. So what we'll do is we'll go over to the guillotine and we'll hack it across. So what I do in sort of trying to make it economical and not use up too much metal, yeah, I can go straight across there. We can go straight across there with the guillotine, straight across there with the guillotine. And then we've got 2 of the sort of main parts, then 2 of these sides. So we'll go over to the guillotine and then we'll chop that out. So I'll put my light on here and then I can look down and through and see what I'm doing. And I can see the line where it lines up down in here. So that's what I'm trying to do, is look down through there and see the line when it comes through. So I line it up with the edge of this bit here, the blade, the lower blade. So I line it up with the lower blade there and there, and then I can chop it off. There's always someone after me, isn't there, when I'm busy at work? I guess I'll have to answer that in a minute. Get this chopped off first. Mind your feet. Right, that should be 3 bits to be going on with. What we'll do, we go back to the bench. So what I'll do is I'll mark out now what other lines I can do, you know, straight edges, because you want as many nice straight lines as you can get. And then I can use the snips for what we can't get into the guillotine, if you see what I mean. So what I'm doing is I'll continue these lines that I've cut out with the scribe and with the other rule. So, you know, this is where I went around with the pattern, didn't I? So what I'm doing, I'm picking up on that line there with my scribe, and then I can tip the rule in till it meets up with that line, and that's it. That's going to be in line, and then I can go through there. So I know I'm taking that off, and all that scrap, which will end up under the thing there, won't it? So I can take that one out. Now this is another one I can do. I can do this one straight through here. So I've got 2 lines here I can get rid of, and then they're nice and straight, you know, it's done nicely with the guillotine. So I can do that one and that one. Can't get into there because it's a corner, so I'll have to do that manually. Can't do that. I mean, I could go across here to take a bit off, but there's no point really. And again, you can sort of go across like that, but there's no point because I'll just do them manually. So if I mark these out, so I can see which lines I can take off on the guillotine, then we go over there and chop the rest of this down. Less cuts with the snips. You've got a guillotine, you might as well make use of it. Mind you, Robespierre shouldn't have been allowed a guillotine because he made use of it, didn't he? Made good use of it in the French Revolution. So yeah, maybe you shouldn't make use of it if you've got a guillotine. Anyway, we're not doing that, aren't we? We're a bit better behaved in England, aren't we? Don't have these big revolutions. Although some days I do think we could do with a bit of a change in some of the behaviour of some. Perhaps if they thought there's a revolution coming, they might sort of look after us a bit better than they are. Anyway. And once you go sort of bigger, you do start needing to have a powered one, because of course you can't really get through the bit of metal in one go if it's really long. Great for this, you know, but when I'm doing long sill sections, it's not really big enough. So I'm just taking these down to size really. I'll have to do plenty more by hand in a minute, but let's just get them down to size. I'll tell you what, all this metal gets really cold, and it's don't know if make your hands cold touching it. I don't mean these little sheets. I mean the actual guillotine itself is obviously quite heavy gauge steel, and it's soaked up all the cold, hasn't it, over the last few days, and it's just here, and touching it, it's just making my hands frozen. Anyway, there you go. Hazards of not having a proper heated workshop. Maybe one day I'll have a proper heated one. I think there's a bloke in America who's got underfloor heating in his workshop. Mind you, I couldn't have that because the heavy machinery would bust it, wouldn't it? It wouldn't work. But it makes you think. I thought that was quite a nice little idea, having some underfloor heating. Anyway. Yeah, beggars can't be choosers, can they? Next bit is to trim these down a bit more. So what I'm going to do, we've got these holes to deal with. We want to put them into it, don't we? So I've already marked them out and put a centre dot in there. And do you remember we used that nice big Whitney punch? So we can use that. You remember there's a pimple in the end of it? We'll find that little pimple, get that on our centre dot, and then we'll be taking that out in the middle of there. So we can pop that through there like that. So yeah, it lines up. See, it's sort of lined up and clicked in. This is quite heavy, this. So I must get that big bench mounted one going. There you go, right, so that's gone through that one. And what I'll do is use the Q-Max in a minute to take them out further. If I had my things set up properly with some hole punches on my tool that's over there, which I can't think the name of, I'll be able to use fly press. I could use the fly press for this, couldn't I? But anyway, right, that's them two done. Now I keep wobbling on about the bench mounted one. That's my bench mounted Whitney punch. But it has different dies in it to the other one, to that handheld one. But it's the same thing, you know, you put it in there, put your metal in there and you can pull it down and do that, and again it has the pimple on it to line it up. But it has takes different dies to the to that handheld one. So I've got to get a set of dies for it, but then I can, you know, get this mounted up on the bench. I mean, nice to get it cleaned up actually, wouldn't it? Could do with straighten this handle out a bit, but you know, it's a nice tool, that, isn't it? And that a nice piece. There we go, Roper Whitney, isn't it? Roper Whitney. I follow on Instagram. I ought to phone them up, wouldn't I? Get the tools for it. Perhaps they'll sponsor a video. You never know. Seems to be all the rage. A little Q-Max tool. Do you remember these? Used these before, haven't we? I mean, to be honest, most of this fabrication work is the same, isn't it? Once you know, it's just a process of using the same tools in different ways to get different different results for sort of different jobs you're doing. But it's pretty much all the same stuff, really. It's all the same techniques. Once you learn one technique and you've got one bit of tooling, it's sort of off you go, really, isn't it? Right, so there you go. So that's going to cut through there, isn't it? So let's wind that through so it cuts through that. I think we were doing these on our when I did that one about that on the Dino on the Maserati, when we were doing the seals on that, we were doing a thing about swaging. I made that swage tool, didn't I? And we cut all them out with a big Q-Max and then used that Q-Max punch, and then I used that nice swage tool I made to swage it. And that was this is sort of the same, but we're not going to swage this hole because it's not swaged from factory. They don't bother swaging it. So there you go. So that's cut that out, and then we've got to get the little bit of debris out from the middle. There you go. That's the little bit of debris. You can flatten that out and make it into a washer, can't you? So yeah, so I just sort of did that by hand. You can put this in a vise or something to hold it because you've got these flat edges on it. Here, you could use, you know, or you can hold it with a spanner or something. Or, you know, say put it in the vise, which will do that just to demonstrate that you can do that. So if I pop that in the vise like that, so just grabbed hold of the flats like that, so it's held onto it, tighten that up, and then wind this round. Now you could use an air tool on here, but you'll probably bucker it up, won't you? Rip all the threads out of it. So I do it manually. This is one of these old things you used to get. I think that was for doing the brakes, the brake pins on things like Golfs back in the day. There's sort of Series 2 and Series 3 Golfs, which dates it and dates me from when I used to do all that sort of work when I was running the normal garage. Now people collect them cars, and when I used to have them, they were just old bangers. Now people go rave about them and collect them. Anyway, there you go, right. So that's that. Got a bit of debris in there, but I'm not taking it out now because I want to get on with this job, don't we? We want to get on because we're cold. So what you can do when you're working in the corners, sometimes you can put a little hole with a Whitney in there to work up to, which is quite a nice little trick. But I'm not going to do that because I have to use the deep-throated Whitney, which means changing the hole size. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go down into here. Now, with my piece that I use for marking out, my pattern, you see we put a little nib in there. And in there, and that's to see where our, you know, when you transfer it over onto here, it shows you where your lines are going to be for where your folds want to be. So there's our little nib mark there. So we go right into the centre of that, and that will give us our date. And we could back mark it off the edge if we wanted to double check, but for expediency of this, I'm just going to do it like this. So that's where we're going to want our fold, there. And now we're going to cut that down into there. Now I use the straight snips. Now the reason I'm flying around like this and moving it around is so that I can see what I'm doing. So I'm trying to get it underneath the light enough so that I can see where I'm going. Which might not be the best angle for the camera, but I'm more concerned about I can see what I'm doing than you can see what I'm doing. Because I don't want to have to make this more than once. Right, so we get up to that edge. There you go. So that's there. And this one's a swoopy one, isn't it? That's a swoopy line. Now, we can cut that in one go, but it's probably better to take a bit of material off so we're not working harder, you see. So, because when you cut this, it's going to bow up. And obviously you're sort of, you know, you're moving that metal around, aren't you? So it's easier to take a bigger lump off first, and then you're only working a lesser part, aren't you, when you actually want to cut it down. So again, I've got to follow this line, and I've got to see what I'm doing. Go into the corner like that. So that's that bit done. We've got this lot to cut out, and these, haven't we? We'll do this first. Now, if we'd prep this up, this is when you do the old Blue Peter. Here's one we made earlier, old job, wouldn't you? But let's just do this live, then you can see it, can't you? Some of you'll be bored. Right, and then that was, we just took that edge off, didn't we, a bit, so I'm just taking that off there. And then we can take that out with a file, because we just want a slightly rounded edge on there. So again, in the same manner, we'll go into the corner with it. That, and then if I hack out the worst of it first, then we don't have to be pushing so much metal around, do we? So you take the worst off, and then we work up to the actual line and be a bit finer with what we're doing. Right, get those off a bit, so we haven't got anything too sharp to jab ourselves with. Okay, well we've got our shape. I'm going to put those in the scrap bin. Right, so we've got a hole there, and then we're putting the folds in, so I'll mark that one out, so that folds up this way, that one folds this way. We've got a fold that goes down through here, but we'll mark that out in a minute, which will go from that edge there to there. So that should go from there to on that corner. Now that's why, I'm not sure why we've got this rounded off there, because it looks like we want a sharper corner. Doesn't matter, we'll work that out. And then obviously we've got to put this one up there, that's got to go up. So we're going to back mark that one, so I'm just using the dividers. Now these, I think I talked about these before. So that's for drawing a circle, isn't it? You've got them the same length. So if you wanted to draw a circle with them, you put them there and like that, and then you wind it round, don't you, just like you would at school. Or if you were sort of like, they were old-fashioned map readers doing that, counting things, wouldn't they? But anyway, that's that. But you see, to do that, obviously the ends are parallel, aren't they? They're at the same level. And these, you can see I've marked them off like that. So one's like that, one's lower. So I basically took a set of these and ground them down. And the reason for that is then you can use them for back marking. So if you can imagine, I can't do a circle anymore like that, but what I can do is I can put that on the edge there and I can mark it along like that to get a depth. So that's what I'm doing. So just by doing that like that, that gives me roughly what I'm looking for, isn't it? That's my depth. So what I do is I'll back mark that round like this. You see, that gives me that. And I'll try and mark this one out. So what we want to do is we want to mark this. We need to go do that one, don't we, next? So what we want to know is how far those are between each other. So I'll just do it like this. For speed, I'm going to do it like that. So that gives me about there, doesn't it? So if I go from there back across to here, because I want this marked on the inside edge, don't I? It's just a very, very quick way of doing it. It's a bit rough, but it's a quick way of doing it. So I can go off of there, and that gives me that there, doesn't it? Which will give me that one. So I've mapped it across to where I wanted it. And you remember that goes from there to there? So I mark that out quickly. From there to there. That'll give us that one, won't it? So that's it. So we've got to do that one up like that. So that's got to do that one. Then that ties in with that little piece, wouldn't it? Like that. So that'll give us roughly our angle, wouldn't it? If we go over there and use this, we'll see what angle we want. So let's go and fold this. So we'll pop this in this nice old straight folder. Now we've got this problem here, haven't we, where if we stick that in there, we're going to end up folding that bit, aren't we, as well? Because it will go under there. So what I think we'll do is we'll just bend that out of the way for now, and straighten that out later. So we want to put that in there, don't we? So we're going up to that edge. Get it on the edge there. Right, that'll do, won't it? And then we want to go up to, it was going to end up about like that angle, isn't it? So it's going to end up like that, isn't it? So we want it to be something like that. Should be about right. End up, remember that's going to end up there. See, so it's going to end up about that angle there, isn't it? So that's about right. We can move this around in a minute if we need to. Then we want to go back with this one, don't we? Let's get this in here. And you see that'll go like that because that's going to end up sort of parallel there, isn't it? And that one we want to get in here, don't we? And we struggle a bit with that because we've got this hanging off of it, aren't we? So we could try and do this in the folder, or we could use that other tool we were using. But you know, I'm just going to use it in the folder, it'll be all right. And I'll just have to tap it straight later, won't I? So if I do that, it's going to bend that, but I can soon straighten that out. So I'll go up to that. There you go, that's it. So I've just got to straighten that one out a bit, haven't I? And that gives us that lot. So I'm just going to straighten this bit out on my block here, just to make life easy. Right, so next one we're going to do is that, wasn't it, to pull that one up. So we could run that through the Jenny to break the edge, and then use one of those little tools, couldn't we, to tip it up? Or we could tip it all up with one of these tools, couldn't we? It doesn't, and then do it with a hammer and dolly. I think for the purposes of this, we won't use a Jenny, we'll just use one of these and use a hammer and dolly, because then it shows that you don't have to have a Jenny. So you do a little bit at a time, because you don't want to mess it up. Otherwise you get it really, really crinkly, wouldn't you? Now this is where it will join the sort of front edge of the splash panel inside the inner wing. Now we're going to have to stretch this a bit, because obviously we've got to stretch that round, haven't we? So you can see it's just trying to do that with it, so we've got to stretch this round a bit as we try and knock it round. So what we do, we use a bit of this, we'll try and knock it round a bit on here. Right, so it's bowed this up a bit, which means I've got to try and push that down a bit and then beat that edge around a bit, but I can do a bit more of that. Similar thing on this, so I'll chuck it up that end, and then I can just try and get this to sit down. So yeah, we're starting to get our edge, aren't we? We've gone off the line a little bit, but it'll be all right. We can soon tap that round. Anyway, so the idea is to keep working this. And gradually we're stretching that edge as we're going and pulling it down. So we're getting there, and that'll work. We can finish that off in a minute, I can. So, or not in a minute, another time. So that's got to go in there and join like that. So we've got to do that, and we've got to do this piece here. So that will go that way round. So we've got to fold this edge down. We can check this, double check this before we fold it by back marking it, can't we? If we can find our little our ones we're using for back marking, so we can do that and just double check it. So it's going to be this, that's what it's going to do, is that. Got to fold that back, this one, double check that, I can do that. So that's two of our folds. We've got to put a fold there, then that one's going to fold back in, just bump that back a bit, and that'll allow for that. So that'll be that one. So we should, if our patterns are correct, this will all work out. If our pattern isn't, then we've got to finesse the pattern a bit. Which is what I was saying I've been doing a bit lately, isn't it? So, but for the purposes of what we're doing today, we're just going to quickly knock this up and get it done. And then I'll finesse it next week if I have to. Got to do that one. So there you go, you're going to do that one. See how it snakes around like that. Now again, you can do the little tweaky thing like that, or we'll use the Jenny, and the reason is because we didn't do last time. So we want to tip that edge up, so I've got to follow that basically with this wheel and tip it up as I go. So as this goes through, it will break the metal, it'll put a start on it and break it. And then I should be able to follow that line if I'm careful as I wind the handle. And it will just put a sort of a mark for me to work to. And if I tip it up at the same time, it might even begin to tip the edge, which is what traditionally people would do, but I'm not going to do that too much because otherwise I can't follow my line at the same time. Now, a lot of people put a wheel on these rather than a handle because then you can a bit easier to turn. You know, when you're leaning over, you use a steering wheel. But yeah, you can see it's put a line in it to work to. So if we hold that flat on the bench, then we should keep it in roughly in where it's got to go. And you see this, we're just working up to the edge, working up to our line that we had. And we're just working into that corner. So yeah, we're starting it, aren't we? Remember, we've got to work out how far we've got to go. So I'm going to go a bit further than that. Remember, you make these. People say, oh, where'd you buy that? It's like, well, if you have to buy that and you can't make it, you can't make stuff with it either, can you? So you have to make the tools to make the stuff. And if you're capable of making the stuff, you'll be capable of making the tools to make the stuff with. So that's why these were sort of apprentice pieces, making things like this. And so making these sort of tools up, you know, 'cause then you'd have them for the rest of your working life sort of thing. So they're wonderful if you can pick them up with someone, you know, old ones that have been nicely made. Yeah, I must admit, this isn't very well made because I had to knock it up quite quick. Because you've got to remember, I didn't do the apprenticeship in this. I'm a mechanic. That's what I did my apprenticeship in. And this is all stuff I had to learn later on in life. So I had to sort of, it wasn't self-taught. People were able to, you know, I did have people teaching me. But I had to do a lot of it myself. Now I'm going to hammer and dolly. There's a hammer, I'll get a dolly and I'm just going to chase that round a bit just to get that to the angle I want it at. Right, so we're trying to do that with it, aren't we? Trying to get that's about the right angle. So if we do our folds now, we'd use them on the fold of those. Now this one is where it lines up on the inner, on the chassis rail, if I remember rightly. Do that like that. That's why you have these cutouts, so you can get your metal in, you know, when you've got a problem like that, so you can get it up to the edge. That's what that cutout's for. And then we want that one, don't we? So we've got to look in for another cutout to put that into, which will be there. You see it bent that up, didn't it, when we was doing the last one? So we'll bend that down, then the folder itself will flatten that out in a minute. So we should just be able to get that into that edge there and into there like that. Okay, and that'll flatten that out. And then we fold that up. And that's where it hits the floor, isn't it? So that's our bit. So we're going from there to there. We've got to have a little tip up there, haven't we, on that? So that's got to sort of tip up. So first off, we've got to tip this up, which is going to be at this angle, isn't it? Looking at that, that's going to be at that angle there. So that goes from that edge there to there, and that should tip up a bit there. I could easily put that in a folder, but I don't want to have to make you drag you over there again. So if we do that there to there, right, it's not that hard, is it? It's not like a really hard fold, is it, there? So that'll do that. I'll break that over the bench like that. Then this has sort of got to do this twisty sort of swirly bit, hasn't it? To sort of follow that shape, remember? It also rolls, doesn't it? It sort of rolls and twists over as it goes by the looks of it. And it's something like that, aren't we? Alright, just sharpen that edge up a bit. Right. Yeah, so that's going to follow in something like that, isn't it? It's going to do that one, isn't it? Something like that. So let's try and get that in place with some grips. I'm just going to grab that there like that. And it looks like that curls round a bit there, so we might need to shrink the edge of this a bit. So you want to sort of fit that in there somewhere like that. So that's got to follow that curve. So we've got a bit of work to do on that yet. So that's going to want to go something like that, isn't it? So if I grab some grips on there and just pinch that edge. This is just trial, you know, I'm not going to assemble this just yet. We're just going to start off like this. It'll take shape in a minute. And obviously as you spot weld it together, it will start to sort of pull itself into shape. But obviously you want to be making sure that you're spot welding it in the right place to start with. So I'm just going to grab that like that. You can see it starting to follow the shape. I mean, obviously that's going to need a bit of tapping round. Okay, so I'll pull that down there. If I pull that one into line a bit with another pair of grips, different type of grips. So if we was to pull that sort of in there like that, you see? So we're getting there. It's not quite there yet, is it? It's going to need a bit of finessing, and I've got to knock this edge down here. I'm not going to do that where it goes over that bit of double skinned area. That makes sense, doesn't it? Going to need a bit more finessing. We're not quite there yet, but I think that's enough for now, isn't it? Yeah, you get the idea. Well, I don't know about you. You're probably sitting at home, aren't you, with a cup of tea, all cosy, aren't you, on the sofa watching this? And I'm freezing cold, and I'm going home. So that's enough of that. I'll do some phone footage of it finished, and we'll put that at the end of the video. So good night. I'm off. That's it. Time to go home.